morning. Good morning, and welcome to worship today at Community Missions. I'm Reverend Mark Breese. Let's begin with our uh, call to worship, as it were, from Isaiah, our opening words from the book of Isaiah in chapter 55, beginning at verse 10. As the snow, as the rain and the snow come down from heaven and do not return to it without watering the earth and making it bud and flourish, so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater, so is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but I will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. You will go out in joy and be led forth in peace. The mountains and the hills will burst into song before you, and all the trees of the field will clap their hands. Instead of the thorn bush will grow the juniper. Instead of briars, the myrtle will grow. This will be for the Lord's renown, for an everlasting sign that will endure forever. Forever. Ooh, my tongue is all twisted up today. Let's have an opening prayer. Lord, we just thank you for a chance to come together and just spend these few minutes focusing on your word, seeing what you have for us today as you lead us forward. Amen. So our text for today, it's a familiar one. It comes from the Gospel of Matthew. It's chapter 13, and it's verses 1 through 9. Usually it's read with some verses that come later. It's the parable of the sower. So this is the actual parable, and then later on, Jesus has an interpretation of that and lays out what it means. But we're going to be looking at just this particular section for the most part. So beginning at verse 1 in chapter 13. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. So, some of you might go to the Gardens of Compassion on Monday mornings that we do here at Get Community Missions over at the St. James United Methodist Church. And if you do, some of you may have noticed something about the green beans and all the other plants in one of the beds, and in all of the beds actually. For a while, there for a while, the plants were fine. They were alive, they were upright, they had leaves. They were technically plants, but they were not exactly showing off. They kind of looked like they were thinking about growing, maybe eventually, if they got around to it. Didn't look like everything was really flourishing. Then last Monday, not just this past one, but a week ago Monday, we decided to work in a little fertilizer into the soil in all of our garden beds there. Nothing dramatic, no lightning from heaven, no angel choirs, singing over them. We just mixed a little bit of fertilizer into the dirt to try and give things a little help. Well, then this past Monday, oof, the beans had taken off. They were bigger and fuller and greener. The watermelons had blossomed up, and everything looked suddenly vibrant and growing, and it really took off. And of course, so did the weeds. We had so much weeding to do on this past Monday because apparently the weeds were paying attention too. Um, and I want you to hold on to that idea of this garden for a minute. It was sort of just limping along, doing okay, but then it kind of blossomed and started to really show well this past week. I think that's going to help us to hear what Jesus has to say today in the Gospel of Matthew. Um, we read that Jesus went out of the house and he sat by the lake, and that large crowd came out. And so he gets in the boat and he speaks with them. And then he told them the parables. And he talks about the farmer who went out to sow his seed, and talked about the different kind of places where the soil, where the seed fell. Some fell on the path and the birds ate it. Some fell in rocky places. The soil wasn't very, deep, didn't have much soil. So they sprang up, but then things died off. And there were some that fell along among the roots or among the thorns, and they were like choked out. And some fell on good soil, and they grew. Now, this is one of those stories that a lot of us have heard before, and it's interesting to notice what it's called. It's called the parable of the sower. It's not called the parable of the bad dirt. It's not called the parable of people who can't get their lives together. It's not called the parable of try harder, you terrible little patch of gravel. It's not called any of those things. And thank goodness that that's not the message that we're supposed to take away from this. The story starts with the one doing the sowing, and that's the farmer. And this farmer is something else. Most farmers are careful. They pay attention to the ground. They make neat rows like we did in the gardens, and they try not to waste seed. Like seeds cost money. Those seedlings we plant, they cost money. We try not to waste those things, and farmers are really frugal that way. But this farmer just goes out and he starts scattering the seeds. It goes in the plants, it goes in the rocks, it goes on the thorn, it goes on the good ground, right? And he just keeps flinging his seeds everywhere. There's kind of almost like a recklessness to it, maybe abandon. God's not reckless in the way that we are, not careless, not foolish, and but there's something in the story that kind of feels like holy abandon, right? Divine extravagance, like love that doesn't first stop and inspect the soil before giving the seed to it, right? It's not going down and examining things. It's just sowing in hope and in love. The farmer doesn't say, well, that ground looks a little hard, so I won't bother. He says, oh, too many rocks over there, forget it. I see thorns, not going to waste my time. What the farmer does is he just sows. The seed just keeps being put out there. And that's actually really good news, because most of us, if we're honest, are not just one kind of soil. I don't think Jesus is handing us four boxes or options and asking us to pick which one we live in this parable. Are we the good soil or the bad soil, the rocky soil or the thorny soil? Uh, Life's just really not tidy like that. Most of us have a little bit of all of those kinds of soil in us, those different ways that we are over time. Mm, And there are places in us that are hard, not because we want to be hard, but because life has kind of walked over us, that same spot over and over again, and kind of things down. And there's places where it's it seems good, parts of us that are willing and open, where a seed can start up fast, but then it wilts as things kind of heat up, right? There's places in ourselves, I know in myself too, sometimes that are honestly pretty thorny, where, I just kind of allow those all those negative things just to choke the good stuff out. Um, Later on in the chapter, Jesus explains that the thorns are like the worries of our life, the stuff that grows up around us and chokes good before it can ever bear fruit. Um, I don't think that any of us need that explained too much. We know something about worries. We know something about bills and fear and shame and old habits and pressures. And when things get rough and feel burdensome, right? We know we have all those different parts to our life, those different moments. That's just being alive in the world. There's hard times and good times. There's in between times, and we respond to those times in healthy ways and unhealthy ways. You know, we're muddling through. We're doing the best we can, and we just don't always hit that mark, right? And that kind of brings us back to the garden. you think about when I was talking about how the beans and the other plants, they weren't kind of springing up right away. Like I can even show you these two pictures, right? Here's the beans before we fertilize. That's a close up of them, and they're kind of, they're growing, they're there. And then this picture is from that week later. It's a little bit farther away, but you can see they're bushy. They fill the whole bed. It's like things happened, right? It's something. It was the fertilizer, right? Um, but again, because they did well, the weeds did too. And you know, sometimes as we go along, things get better, but it brings other stuff too. I guess what I'm saying is that life is inconsistent in a lot of ways that we can't control. And we respond to that in different ways as we go through time. Um, you know, the weeds in the garden were like, thank you, we've been waiting for that fertilizer too, right? Everything grew, and we had to pull out all those weeds. We had to do some work. That's how gardens grow. That's how our life is. We have to tend it, you know. You don't tend the garden once and say, well, that should do it forever. You come back, you water, do more fertilizer, you pull weeds, you make room, right? And I think the thing here is that that I most want to say here today is that a garden that needs tending isn't a failed garden. A garden with some weeds in it is not hopeless. Um, it's just a garden. And a heart, ourselves, our lives are things that need care as well, right? It's not that because we need care or we need to work on stuff, our heart is bad. It's just a human heart, right? Uh, our 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 self, our uh, whole self is this mixed up kind of thing. Good soil in this parable isn't perfect soil. It's not soil with no rocks um, in its past and no weeds in its present. Good soil is simply soil that has room for the seed to grow, and that's all. And most of the growing at first is kind of hidden. Nobody walks past the garden and says, my goodness, look at those roots. We notice the leaves, we notice the flowers, we notice the beans, we don't notice the hidden roots, the things that are underneath, what's invisible to us there. I think a lot of time that's like what happens in life, in recovery, in our growth, in healing, in faith. It's like that. A person can show up taking one small step, letting someone help, trying again, praying even when they're not sure that they believe, and still feel like nothing much is happening. But that doesn't mean nothing is happening. Sometimes the roots are growing first, quietly, where nobody's clapping and saying, "Look at all those green leaves and stuff." So today, I want you to hear this wherever you are at this moment in your life, whatever kind of soil you feel like this morning, is it the rocky soil, the good soil, the thorny soil, in between? The sower, God's love, God's grace in the world is still there. The farmer, the sower is still sowing, planting seeds with kind of a holy abandon that only God can do, an extravagant divine love. Um, it's not waiting until you're easier to work with, until you get it all together. God doesn't wait for that. It's not waiting until every weed is pulled and every bit of ground is softened up. Um, uh, Faith in our life, God in our life, the Spirit of God um, is just something that is continually pumping hope and mercy and a little bit of fertilizer into us each and every day, and letting it land where it will, because we need that help in every moment of our life, the good moments and the bad moments, when we're in the good soil and when we're in the bad soil, right? We're all of these things. This isn't a story, a parable about how you are in one box and so you're not good, or in another box and you're just meh. This is about us just being people, and that God still sends that love to us where we are. So God doesn't give up on the soil. God doesn't give up on us. We do a little weeding, we do a little watering, we move a stone here and there, one small step at a time, because growth can happen long before we can even see it. And growth comes over time. There is always still good in us and still the ability to progress, to heal, and do better, right? To keep moving forward in our lives in this messy thing, this messy garden of life. It just takes a little bit of love, a little bit of fertilizer, a little bit of hope, and things can turn around for us. So that's the parable of the sower. That's what I hope you'll take away from it today. May God bless you as you go forward in your day and throughout the week until we have a little bit of time again next week. Take care.